Alright, so this is the scratch art demo part 2, and in this video we're going to focus more on the top half of the owl, mostly the forehead and a little bit of the ears. So make sure your image is out, and whenever you're looking at your image you don't need to look at the whole thing. You could even have it half covered like how I am, just to make sure you're really focused on these parts. And again, just make sure that your X-Acto blade is not loose to make sure it's not wobbly while you're working. And don't forget, what you need in front of you is an X-Acto, your reference picture, a white paper to use to make sure that your hand oils don't transfer onto the board, and then the scratching board. So I'm going to be working on this area first. And we want to start there because we've noticed the flow of the owl's feathers. And it's moving up. So you want to start from the bottom end and then move your way up. So my biggest tip whenever you start working on his forehead is that don't try to make it so perfect. Try to make sure that you're going loose and that you're also adding those small little scratches into the little dark spots that he has. Because you could see a little bit of those highlights and some whites into his darks, but then the same way we get some little bit of darks into the lighter parts of his forehead. So I just also want you guys to notice how light I'm going right now, and I'll keep on going really light throughout the whole video. And that's only because it's so easy to scratch off and add more white, but once it's there, it's there. Like, you can't bring the black back on. So I just want you guys to be very mindful and careful when it comes to scratching. And you could always come back and add those whites in as you go. So my biggest tip whenever you start working on the spots is that you're going to be making marks around each individual spot. And you'll see in a second in a close-up what I mean by that. So I'd be making really small lines going vertical. So it looks like a hatching technique whenever you're in this area. And I'm also still going in the same flow as the movement of his feathers. So just be very mindful of not making any horizontal lines unless you're doing cross hatching. And here's a close-up of what I'm doing. So you can see that I'm putting lines kind of randomly. I am making sure I have a very loose hand whenever I'm making these lines, as long as they are going vertically, following the movement of his fur. Also, whenever you're working on the forehead, you do not need to copy exactly like how it is in the image. So what I mean by that is that whenever I'm working, I make these little marks just to go around the spots that I did trace. So then I scratch off around the circles, which are the spots, to make the spots stand out. But also, if you notice while I'm working, I kind of just randomly leave some areas dark, so then we could make it seem like there are other spots in those areas. So while I was working, I noticed that they kind of look like pebble marks. So you want to repeat this pattern and texture throughout the whole forehead. And as you move back further away from his head, these pebble marks are going to become smaller just because of perspective. So they're like bigger and more visible in the front, but as you move back, they are going to turn smaller. And so what I do is I first make these pebble looking marks first, and then I go back and add more details, push in those whites. So you don't have to worry about the details right now. So the biggest takeaway whenever you're working on the forehead of the owl is to make sure that your lines are going up and down. You do not want the feathers / lines to be going from side to side. because that is not the direction that the feathers are going in. And here's a little close-up of what I have for now. So we're gonna work on the ear of the owl, and we're specifically gonna work on this area. And the first thing you want to do is focus on the white parts of the ear. And that's only because whenever you get to the black areas, that's going to be a little tough because we are kind of making up part of the lines because there's not much to put in there. And so the white parts are always the easiest. My only tip is to follow the movement and flow of the fur / feathers of the ears. And what I mean by that is that you should be marking on your reference picture the flow and movement of the fur or the feathers of the owl. And just with that, you're going to be looking at that and using that as a reference to see what lines you should be making on your scratch board. Also, again, you do not want to be outlining any part of the owl. So just keep on making the lines and following the flow and the movement of his feathers right there. Also, don't be scared to really push in those whites. Remember that we traced it for a reason, so that we know that that white belongs right there, and that we're not doing it wrong. And don't forget a third piece of paper to put under your hand to make sure that you don't get those natural hand oils onto your project. Okay, so I'm about to do the edge of the head right now. And this is something that I do not want you guys to do at first. This is something that you wait until the end, until you have done all the spots and all the details on the forehead. Remember that you're going to be more focused on hatching than cross hatching when it comes to the top of his head and the forehead, because that's just easier and it goes better with fur or feathers. And here's a little close-up of what I have right now for this demo. Notice how the lines are very short and small, so you want to keep them that way whenever you're in this area, because if you make them long, it's going to look like he has long fur or feathers, so it's not going to look right.